So, I am going to show you guys why I had you all go through that arduous process of doing VS Code, getting Git ready and all that. Because down here in the first unit, the JavaScript fundamentals, I want you guys to go to the checkpoint. Once you're here, you can click on this repository. And I don't have, well, I mean, technically I do, but I'm just going to close it right now. Let's close that. Don't need that right now. So what I want everyone to do, when they're on this page, notice it says G School. That means it belongs to G School. We don't want to modify G School's repository. That's their repository. What we can do to create our own repository, which is essentially a file directory. It's a folder. To put it simply, if we want to create our own copy of this folder, we just click this fork button, and GitHub conveniently shows you how many other people have also clicked this button. So we're going to add to that number. We're going to click this ourselves. I've already forked it. Here it should say your profile name, so click on your profile name. It'll bring you to this page. Now it should say your profile name in addition to the actual repository name, and then down below it says it was a fork from G School. Cool. So now that I have my own repository, what I'm going to do, I'm going to open VS Code. It's saved all my stuff. So this is where I want to get you guys at. Just a quick, we want to be able to access this file. So this is what I'm going to have you clone. For the sake of explaining, I am actually just going to delete this. Oops. So I'm going to type in RM, which is remove, and then I'm going to type in a flag with R, which means recursive. So what this is going to do is it's going to tunnel into the directory and it's going to delete everything. But it's not going to like that, so I have to also include the flag F for force. So this is removing this directory, and then I'm passing in the recursive and forceful flag. Finally, I can go ahead and type in CC. Let me pump this up so you guys can see what I'm talking about. If I type in CC, it's the only selection available, so if I hit Tab, I can go ahead and hit Enter. Now if I hit LS, there's nothing here. You can see everything is deleted. Cool. So I'm going to close out, going to exit. You guys don't need to do this. I'm just trying to get myself back to like completely square one, right? So this is how you'll load up VS Code. And so what you want to do is you want to go to Open Folder, and you want to find the folder that you're going to be using for coding. And in my example, let me see if I can't find this. I just so happen to have a folder called Galvanize, and for an example, I have a folder called Entirely New because it's entirely new. There's nothing in here. So I'm going to pick this folder to be where I want to store all my work. It doesn't need a special name. I highly recommend not using spaces because spaces in file names make it really hard to do. It's not really hard, but it's just like more of a pain in the butt. If you notice, I name my file just like one word, even though it's technically two with no spaces, because adding a space in there just makes it harder to access from the terminal. Once I find the directory I want to work in and I click Open, it's going to change some stuff, but it looks like we're kind of in the same place, right? So with VS Code, I can come over to the left and open my Explorer. There's nothing here. Now, as a refresher, I can hit Control tilde key, which is to the left of your one, and I open up a bash terminal inside of this directory. Notice how it says entirely new here, right? It doesn't say root, it doesn't have a tilde key. Sometimes you'll see this depending on your OS. This means you're at the root directory. Otherwise you might see this, that means you're at the root directory. Either way, we know that we're not there, and we can confirm that by running the command of printing the working directory. So we are not at the root. We are inside of this file that I just selected in VS Code, which is awesome because that means now that I am on my own personal fork of this project, I can click Clone, I can click this clipboard, I can go back to VS Code in this terminal, and all I need to do is type in git clone, and paste in that URL. It's going to do a bunch of stuff, and now all of a sudden I have access to this folder right here. So if I click this folder, I have a ton of different files. Anybody having problems with this step? Are we able to get into VS Code, clone this down, see this stuff? Is that working for everyone? I'm going to start my parent directory. I just cloned down this repository, so I'm going to use the cd command so I can change into this directory. And now I am going to run the node package manager command of install. Now you can just put ini. You can also just put install. It's really up to you. It does the same thing. So I'm used to putting in just a single I because it's way shorter. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to do a bunch of stuff. It's going to create this node modules folder. And then we should see this message that says we have added packages and we have audited them as well. Now that we have used npm I decided just to show that I would run npm audit fix, and then I also showed that sometimes you also need to pass in this flag force. So I was good, no vulnerabilities, it scanned all the packages, whatever. So now what I can do is I can go into this first directory called store1 and I can click exercise. Now again, don't forget, if it's italicized, that means that it's only temporary. So if I click on another file, it's going to replace that file with this one. But that doesn't mean it's erasing anything. All I have to do is just double click it, and now this font changes, obviously. So now it's no longer italicized. But when I click on this, it opens up a new tab to the side. So now I can still go back to exercise, but as long as this is italicized, if I click on another file, it's going to replace that file. So you can think of the italicized file as somewhat of a preview. Pardon me. And then when you're ready to actually work on it, you can either double click up here, you can start typing. If you notice right now, this is italicized. If I start typing, it automatically thinks and that I want to keep that tab there, but that's the difference. If you notice that your project keeps disappearing or you don't know what's going on, make sure that the text isn't italicized. Cool. All right, so now that we're in this file, what I want you guys to do is go into store1 and open exercise. You can even, pardon me, let me grab some water. And I'll just hit my head on the chair. So we got exercise open. I'm going to close the File Explorer by clicking on these two little pages. You can see the tooltip pops up, says Explorer. I'm going to close that for some extra room. After I open this file, so I apologize. Double-click exercise.js, then double-click store1data.js. And now these should both be non-italicized, and we're ready to rock and roll. I'm gonna. Anybody have any problems? Are we good? Going once, going twice? Okay, so I'm going to hit Control-tilde to close my terminal as well. If you ever see one of these red dots, this is actually something that you accidentally put there. So this is good that I brought this up. This is for debugging code. You guys don't really need to worry about this, but just so you guys know, if you click over here, it creates a breakpoint. That means that if you were running your code in debug mode, it would stop at that point in the code, and it would tell you all of the values of everything going on at that current point. So if you're wondering what the heck is going on, if you see these red dots, it's probably because you accidentally clicked there, just like I did. That's why I had that breakpoint there. So going back and forth between these now, it's kind of hard to really conceptualize what we need to do. Obviously, going back and forth is going to be a pain in the butt. An awesome thing about VS Code is that, and a lot of code editors, honestly, is that we can just take this tab, and I'm just clicking and dragging. You can see now it highlights the area that it will take up. I'm using a trackpad, so bear with me. If you drag this all the way to the right, you'll see that it only takes up half of the screen. Now when I let go, I have two different windows. This means that now this variable at the top of this exercise in store 1 is exactly equivalent to this object over here. We're using a node method called require, and we're importing this entire variable as a variable. Okay? You can think of this as literally being copied and pasted to the top of this file. The reason that we're able to do this is because in the actual stored data file, we use another node method called module.exports, and then we equal or use the assignment operator to export the actual variable. So what the heck am I talking about? What we want to do is go through all of these stores and try to solve the challenges. So I will show you an example. In exercise 1, we're using store 1. Over here we have store 1 data. We want to return the value 4.63 from store 1. So looking at this, let me collapse this file explorer. Looking at the left side, how could we possibly return this value, and it's a string, from store 1?
You want to return banana bunches?
Return. So first of all, we need to access the actual variable. So I like where you're heading, but first of all, you want to make sure you enter in the variable. And now look, when I hit dot, my IDE already knows that I'm talking about this file. This file isn't in this file. If I scroll down, there's no, I'm not cheating, I promise. But node is awesome, and so when we require and import this variable, when I type in store 1 dot, it automatically knows I'm talking about that object. So if we look, 2015 1.6, right there, that's one of the keys on this object. Another key, right? We have a ton of keys that are accessible to us. So really all we're doing is we're just doing the same thing that we've been doing between two files, right? So we want to access data in this other file, but at the end of the day, it's still just an object with arrays and objects and arrays and data, blah, 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 blah. So banana bunches, correct. Banana bunches is under 2015 1.8. So let's go ahead and click on that. Now you notice that it automatically converted it to bracket notation. This is because if you want to access a specific key that is a string, it has to be in brackets. If I tried to do this, I'll show you. If I tried to do this, it errors out. You see that? And let's see if we can't see what it says. Unreachable code. It's not allowed. You can't put a string as with dot notation. If you want to access a string, which we can tell it's a string because right here we're looking at it. This is a string. If we want to access this, we have to use bracket notation. Now, our IDE is smart enough to know what we're talking about, but the proper way to access this would be to do brackets. So that's why it automatically does that. So now that we're at this point, if we look in, we can see that this is a key, but the value is an array. So if I wanted to access the first value of this array, what would be the next thing that I would need to type in? 0. So I type in 0. So now we're inside of this array right here. So what is the last thing that I need to type in order to return 4.63? Index 1, correct. So if I type in index 1, now, if I hit enter, it's not going to do anything, right? That's because we're using an IDE. So if you want to test to make sure you got the right answer, what you would do is bring up the terminal with Control tilde. And again, we're still in the same place. I'm going to type in clear, which I'm sure you can imagine what that does. And now the reason we typed in npm install is because that installed tests onto this file for us. So now, if I type in npm test, now this is specific to this repository. Not every repository has this. You can set these yourself if you want. It just so happens that the people that created this repository wrote the script this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in npm test dot / that means your current directory. Right now your current directory is /. So if I type in my current directory and then I type in store 1, because that's the one I'm working on, we can see right here, and I hit enter, this kind of looks familiar, right? These are the tests. So I failed everything because all I did was the first one, but if we look, it says we should have returned 4.63, but instead we returned undefined. Okay. So store 1, the first index, and I don't know why that would return undefined. Am I doing the right thing? It's the 0 index. Wait, so yeah. 2015, 0, 1. Oh, I can. I'm glad this happened. What's that? Nope. Anybody? I'm not expecting you guys. Nope. This dot right here means I forgot to save my file. Boop. So I'm going to hit Command S. I think on Windows it's Control S. Now here I can just hit up to run the same command. So again, if I'm just at like a blank terminal, I can hit the up arrow key. It should be like on the right side of your keyboard to bring the history of my commands that I've entered in back. So I'm not typing this in, I'm not pasting this in, I'm just hitting up on my keyboard. And when I hit enter, we should see that that passed, that test did pass.
Okay, what did you do?
It didn't.
Control S. With the cursor at the top.
In the cursor.
It needs to just be in that same, let me see.
Yeah, if you click in the exercise.js window.
Alright, so we have confirmed that we're passing the first test. I ran npm start, npm test period / store 1. I'll do it again. And we get all these horrible errors, but the important thing is that if we can scroll up and make sure that we're passing this first test that we attempted right here, we're in good hands. That's what we're looking for. Now, if we don't want to work in this environment and this is frustrating, one thing I would recommend is we can close the terminal or whatever. Now I'm going to hit Command A, which is a shortcut for select all. On Windows, I believe it's Control A. And so you should have all of your text highlighted. If that doesn't work, well actually, can we do this? Boom, there you go. You can collapse it using this ± sign. And you can see, if I open this, it's not selected. If I collapse it and then select it and open it, everything is selected. So there's a little shortcut if you're having a hard time with Control A. So I'm going to open this, Control A, Command A, Command C, Control C, copy it, and we can bring this to REPL, which is something that we might be a little more familiar with, right? I'm going to pump this up. So now, when I paste this in, I have access to this object. Now, the thing you want to keep in mind is if you also copy module.exports, make sure you erase that. But this kind of also brings to light how we're going to use this data and how we're accessing it. This is literally just a variable, right? Once I get rid of module.exports, this is just another variable. If I come in here and I type in console. You first need to learn how to type. If I type in console.log store1 and I run this, it brings me back that object, right? This is still an object. It's still a variable. We can still do all of the normal JavaScript stuff that we're used to doing with this variable. The difference and the thing that might throw you off is that when we're in VS Code, node is what allows us to use this require keyword and assign this variable equal to this variable in another file. So this is what Node is doing for us essentially. It's just importing this file. Now this may seem trivial now, but this will make more sense as we start to work with more complicated programs and applications as such. So if this is really bothering you and you're like, I hate seeing all these tests, what you can do is just look for what it's asking for. Now I'm going to, it says return how many mint wafers were sold on January 6th. So I'm going to copy this. We don't even need this anymore, right? I'm going to close that right tab. Now it's going to open up this whole left tab. In case I wanted to bring that back, as a reminder, I can just double click this, make sure it's not italicized, and go ahead and drag it over to the right. That's how we get back to this spot, but we don't need to worry about that because I'm going to come over here. If I put this in a console, comment, we need to figure out how many mint wafers were sold on January 6th. All right, you got it. January 6th. Boom. How many mint wafers were sold? 3. So what I can do now, I'm gonna pull this out a bit, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to move this up. All I am doing is console logging. I removed module.exports. I just have this as a variable, and that's all I did. Well, I guess I could take this little challenge here too. Push this down. There we go. So our goal is to return how many mint wafers were sold on January 6th. So if I console log store1, we get this huge thing. But what if we console log store? Now we're going to need to use brackets because this is a string. If this was an integer, I could access this with dot notation. So actually, well, this isn't an integer. I mean, it would probably evaluate to like 2009 or something, right? But that's not what we're dealing with here. We need to use bracket notation because it is a string. So I'm going to be lazy, and I'm actually just going to copy this because I know this is where we need to go. And I'm not going to do anything else except for fix my mistake right there. Make sure this is a string. I'm going to run it again.
Do we have to do this in Replit, or can we do it in VS Code?
You could do it in VS Code. I'm just showing, like, if you really hate VS Code and, like, every single time you run the test, you're like, gosh darn it, I hate seeing all this red. You know, I'm just showing, like, this is a different way that you could approach it as well. Why would it not? Oh, I know why. So remember, the compiler reads top to bottom, left to right. Let's make sure. Whoa. Let's make sure that we do this after the declaration of the variable. So now that we're in this key of 2015 January 6th, we have a little less data to deal with, right? So knowing JavaScript, this bracket indicates this is an array, and we can tell this is an array of arrays because there's arrays separated with commas. So the same way that we would declare an array with like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, it's the same thing going on here, except the only difference is we're not dealing with just single values, we're dealing with nested arrays. So this is what we're looking at right now, right? So we have an array indicated by this bracket and this bracket. See how they double up? We have 2 brackets here and we have 2 brackets here. The key here is that there's commas. So all the values in an array are separated by commas. So we're in an array, but we're in an array of arrays. Okay. We're trying to figure out how many mint wafers were sold on January 6th. So, knowing that this is an array, what index would I need to access in order to hit mint wafers? Close.
I did 1 and 2.
1. Well, yeah, there we go. I'm trying to show. Cannot read property object array of undefined. What did I? Oh, I was like, holy crap! I broke something. There we go. And then yeah. Now we're dealing with a single array, so we can just access the second index in this array to finally return how many were sold on that day. So we just took this enormous object, just pardon, is it an object? It is an object. We took it, copied and pasted it into REPL, and using console log, we were able to figure out the answer to this problem. So now, let me just copy this out of the console log. I'm going to return to VS Code. I'm going to paste this in. How many mint wafers are sold on January 6th? This is the problem I just solved in REPL. I'm going to paste that. Don't forget you need a return. And now I'm going to save. Don't forget to save. That's the mistake I made earlier. So save. Now that circle is gone. And now I'm going to bring my terminal back up. I'm going to type in clear. And I'm going to do the same thing. npm test on the store1 file. And now hopefully we should see 2 passing, which we do. So there's 2 ways to go about this. If you want to continue working in REPL, you can. However, if you want to work with an IDE, you can also do that as well. If you're having trouble figuring out what the heck is going on, you can also console log store1. Now let me test this. I'm not 100% sure. It depends on how they wrote the script. Do we get a console log? We do not. This is accessing data 2. Oh wait, I should probably console log something like signature that I would recognize, right? Save. Let's run this again. I'm not seeing anything that says signature. So if you wanted to run a console log in this file, oh wait, signature. Here it is. Okay. Well, we found it. But another thing you can do is type in node. Let me just type in ls just to make sure I'm in the right place. So what we're going to do right now, we're in the parent directory. We're in CCF data structures. If you wanted to run this console log, I would just type in. Actually, you need to call it. So let's see here. If we call, where is it? Accessing data 2. Now you don't need to do this. I'm just showing a different way to display the data on the screen. If you're comfortable with the ways I've shown you, you don't need to do this. So I just took accessing data from up above. Let me close the terminal. So all of these already have names, right? I just copied this, and what I'm doing down here is I'm just calling it. Now this is going to like mess up all your tests, but what you can do is you can change your directory to store1. Oh, pardon me. If you type tab, so what happened right here, I typed in change directory and then I hit S, and then when I hit tab, see how it puts in T? Because there's multiple options that start with ST. So there's stretch exercises, there's store, right? So it's trying to help me, but it doesn't know where I want to go. Now if I hit O, we automatically tell the computer we're not looking for stretch exercises. So if I hit tab, now we get store. So it's showing me, okay, I have all these options for store, but I don't know which one you're talking about. So sometimes when you hit tab, if there's more than one selection, it will complete it up to a point. Pardon me, ma'am, I believe the event you're looking for is down the hall to the left. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, of course. So now that we're at this point with store, if we just type in 1, the computer will know what we're talking about. If we hit tab, it might add that little thing. But now when we hit enter, we're in store 1. If I type in ls, exercise spec, blah, 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 same thing is right here. This is a visual aid on the left, but this is what the computer is seeing essentially in the terminal. So now if we type in node, Exercise, again, you do not need to do this. I'm just showing a different way. See that? I get signature. Node is the V8 Chrome engine extracted from the browser. Node allows us to run JavaScript not in a browser, to put it plainly. So what I just did is I called Node to run this JavaScript file, and if you look at the file, there's not really anything that's being called that would necessarily cause an error. This is a Node feature, so this is fine. Node doesn't have a problem with that. As a matter of fact, this module.exports on the bottom of this is also Node. So there's no like dependency like fault or anything like that. This is all within Node. If we wanted to console log, we would just need to make sure that we take this function declaration with our console log inside it, and then in our terminal, making sure that we're in the correct directory, store1, we can just call Node to actually run the file itself. If you feel like doing that, kudos to you. I personally don't. But that's another way you can do it if you wanted to do it that way. So my goal is to hopefully have us completing at least this first store challenge by the beginning of next week. So I showed you how to do the first one, I showed you how to do the second one, and now we're going to be doing loops. So I will go through this one with you guys as well. But this is going to help you get familiar with an IDE. It's going to help you get familiar with Node. It's going to help you get familiar with the terminal. That's what we're shooting for. We want you guys to become familiar with these technologies so that they don't feel foreign and scary to you guys. And you can see, even if I put in a console log and I run the tests, it doesn't break anything. Well, actually, let me test something. So it doesn't matter what directory you're in. If you type in the correct test, it will run that file. We get our console log back, but since we're running it with this npm test command, it runs all the tests too. If I don't want to run the tests, I can just type in node and then the name of the file, which is exercise.js. See, so again, notice how it does exercise dot, because there's two files that start with exercise dot. So I typed in E and I hit tab and it was like, I know what you're talking about up until this point, but I need you to help me out. So now when I type in J and I hit tab, it knows that I'm talking about the JavaScript file. So I'll hit that again. I got rid of the function declaration. I used to have the function declaration down here. That's no longer there. So that's why when I type in node, nothing happens, because there's not actually any functionality going on inside of this file. Let me show you what I'm talking about. We're declaring a ton of functions, right? So this would be the same thing as var, but we're declaring functions. So we have a function called looping data, another one, blah, 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 right? But if you look at this, none of these functions are ever called. The way we would get this console log to output is we have to call the function. So again, if I put in accessing data 2, whereas I just ran this 4 times and nothing came up, now that I'm calling the function, Node is going to run through this file and it's going to execute everything. Anybody notice what I did wrong? Thank you. And I kicked over my water. I did not save. Oh boy. All right. So we have my commit message right here after I just finished. I did git add after I saved. I did git commit with my message, just finished the first couple of problems, and then it tells me right here after I type in git status that I was ahead of my remote, so I need to push. I pushed, it told me all this jumbly stuff, and now we're here. You're always going to see this because you are forking off of an original project. If you were to create your own project, see, so pay attention here. It says explicitly it's forked. If we were going to go to our own project, it would not say that because we're the originators of that actual file. So this is a project I did when I was in school, and you can see that there is no forked underneath it because this is my personal work that I did myself that nobody has forked. Now we're using Galvanize's repository, which has helped teach 473 people. So you're always going to see this message because your fork is going to be ahead of the master. What it's talking about with the master is the actual repository that you forked it from. So if we look here, there's been 38 commits, which is the exact same thing that we're doing here. There's been 38 commits where people are pushing their work to this repository. Before we did anything, this is the public available repository that we went to. But if we go back, we see that I have 42 commits because I've done more work on this project than they did. So that's why we're going to see this message. It's going to be there all the time. It's not a problem. I just want you guys to be aware of why that's there. Save that. Cool. All right. I will stop. All right. So we have solved the second problem. I'll comment it out. It doesn't really matter. Console logs are always going to be ignored by your compiler. I mean, if you type in like console.log like that, it's going to be like, I don't know what the heck that is, and it's going to error out. But for all intents and purposes, this is blank space for the computer. So we can leave that in there for now. Now, normally I would code probably on a text scale around here. Now, this might be a little hard to read, so for demonstration, I'll have it pumped up, but normally I would have this zoomed out a little bit more just so I can like visualize the data a little bit better. But our first challenge is going to be creating a loop to read which candies were sold by store 1 on January 8th. After simply outputting the data, try creating an array that contains the candy names. All right. Let I equal 0, while I is less than, let's see, candies are sold by store 1 on January 8th. So we're looking here, and we're trying to grab these values, 1, 3, 7, 2, 1.
So it's which candles, so it's the names of the candles. Yes. Or candies.
Yeah.
Names of the candies.
After outputting the data, try creating an array that contains the candy names. What is this looking for? I'm not actually quite sure. Let's just run the test and see what it's expecting. Because this is telling me to return 2 things, essentially. So if you're ever uncertain of what's asked of you, I mean, just run the tests. So we'll do, again, npm test, and then I'm just going to enter in the name of the directory. This is based on this repository. This is not a constant thing that you'll find in every single JavaScript project. This is written by people who created this repository. So when I run this script, we have an unexpected token at the 9th place. Let me see what I did wrong. I forgot to save.
Return array of candy names.
Why aren't you working, son? Oh, because I declared that for loop. Oh my god. There we go. What are you talking about, bro? Oh. So JavaScript is awesome because the errors literally show you exactly where it's occurring. I thought I knew what it was, but but I didn't. So as you can see here on the tooltip, I just did command click and it brought me right to what the problem was. I didn't realize I had an extra single /, so let's finally run the test for the third time to see what's expected. So we've passed the first two tests, and if we scroll up, we can see that we are returning the correct things with our console log. So all we want is an array of candy names. So perhaps this is a little bit of, I don't know what the word is, but if you run the test, we don't necessarily need to read how many were sold or anything like that. We simply just need to return an array of which candies are available inside of this object. So the way we would do that, now that we've confirmed that this is what we need to do with our test, we'll close this and let's uncomment this. So let's see, we want to be in store. We want to be on the 8th. So that is store 1. There we go, the IDE. I love using an IDE. Oh, I'm so happy we're back on IDEs. If I type in store 1, you can see it already knows what I'm talking about, and it even shows you the beginning of the object. And it tells you what the data types are in here. So it shows you that this is a string, and then inside of here it says number. I don't know why. Let's find out. There we go. So this is the IDE. This is VS Code doing this for me. I just type in store 1 and I can click on that I and I have a visualization of the data available to me. So this is saying that it's an object with string keys that contain, this is saying that it's an array of arrays. So this is this might be hard to read, but it's essentially saying that this is an array of arrays with strings and numbers. Strings or numbers. But we have the data available for us right here. So we can just hit dot. We can go to the 8th. Now again, it automatically knows that we're talking about this string, so it converts it to a string, and then it uses bracket notation. To drive the point home, if I tried to do this with a dot, it doesn't let me. So let's bring it back. We need to use bracket notation. There's 2 ways to access objects: brackets and dots. That's it. So here's brackets, and then the IDE is so cool and awesome that it knows that when I hit a dot, that I'm trying to access something within this object. So that's why when I hit dot, it knows that I'm trying to access the object, because there's literally 2 ways to access objects: dots and brackets. So I hit dot, even though that's technically not the correct thing, and then when I hit that, it converts it to bracket notation automatically. So now we know we're inside of this array. What we need to do is actually do dot length here, because this is the array that we want to loop over. We're trying to figure out which candies were sold by the store on this day. We're not trying to find out how many. So if we're looping through this array, which we're accessing by passing the key in, again, this is a key on the object of store, So we're saying go to store, and I'll space this out right here. Go to store, go to this specific key, and since we know it's since we know it's an array, as a matter of fact, if we scroll over it, it says array. That's the array constructor. That's why it's teal. We know it's an array. So we're in an array, and we're going to finish off this for loop. And right now, what we're essentially doing is iterating this array. The computer knows we're iterating this array because we passed in this key. The computer is smart enough to know that if we're talking about this key, it knows we want the value inside. It's not expecting us to say, go to this key and then go inside the value. It already knows that we want the value because we're passing in the key. So by passing in store 1 with bracket notation January 8th, I know that I'm already inside of this array. Now, we need to create a loop to return which candies are sold But as we have it right now, there's not really a way to store that. So we're going to need an accumulator. Does anybody know what I should declare this accumulator as? One more time? No? It's just a very basic anonymous type that I want to use to store the values I'm iterating over. An accumulator can be anything. An accumulator can be an integer, it can be a string, it can be an array, it can be an object. Our accumulator sole purpose is to literally accumulate values. We want our accumulator to be an array because this challenge right here explicitly says that we're going to be returning an array. Now again, this is a little vague, so the way that we confirm this is by running this test. So it says explicitly right here in this failed test that we need to return an array of candy names. So if you find the instructions to be vague, just run the test, npm test.store1, and we can find out exactly what the tests are looking for. We need an array. Knowing that we need to return an array, we can initialize our accumulator to an empty array, because we know that we'll eventually need to populate that array and then return it. So what we're going to do inside of our for loop is we are going to, I am very tempted to actually just console log, just to see where we're at. So I'm going to do console log store one, again, dot 2018. Now we've declared our iterator so we can see what I is iterating over by simply passing an I with bracket notation. We are not accessing any specific key called I. We're passing in our integer here. So to lead you guys through exactly what's going on, and as a matter of fact, I should just probably run this. So let me see. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do need to save it. Yeah. Nope. Bar. Yeah. It would say it would error out. It's not going to error out here because I'm not actually calling it. But if I do flipping data 1, and then it's node. So here's a cool little trick. You actually don't need to be in the directory. If I type in /, right, because current directory, store 1 / e. So I'm not in. I'm still in the parent directory, but I can run this JavaScript file from the parent directory as long as I pass in the correct path. So I'm in CCF data structures, and I'm saying, hey, node, take our current directory, go to store 1, which is right here. Go to store 1 and run exercise.js. So as John pointed out, I need to save, and now we'll run this. Here's our console log. It appears that I did not error out. Pretty sure it should have. That's kind of odd. Let's do, I'm actually really confused by that. All right, I'll stop the recording here. Cool. So we're back here. I'm actually just going to delete this because now we're recording. This doesn't break anything. We can leave it there just in case we want to like run this project with Node. So in order to solve this problem, I have already confirmed that I'm looping over the correct spot because when I did the test, although I'm failing this test, inside of this function, I'm getting these console logs back. And the important thing to note is I have two console logs. The first one is the one that is outputting these strings. Banana bunches, peppermint poppers, mint wafers, and so on, right? But then the next one, you can clearly see here, I actually input this string, and so we're seeing that I is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. So how are we going to return an array that contains all of these names? I'm going to bring my terminal down so I can see, and I'm going to type in, so finally we get to use our accumulator. We get to utilize and realize what this was meant for. So I'm going to type in accumulator. I'm going to type in dot. And again, I didn't say this while I was recording. I'm going to iterate again. This is why I love IDEs, because they allow you access at a moment's notice to everything that you could possibly do. If we were doing this in REPL, it would not be the case. I think that this one, so if I was doing like console, see, like this one kind of has that, but obviously you don't want to be coding in your terminal, because the moment you hit enter, it's going to run it. That's not fun. Also, REPL does not have that functionality, so Visual Studio Code is great because it allows you at a moment's notice to know exactly what you have access to. Knowing array methods, I know that we need this push method. Oh, I didn't realize I was over the wrong one. Push, see, even if I hit P, it knows it can only be one of these two. So I'm going to type in push. This is a method, so I have to open up these parentheses. If I did not open up these parentheses, this would be accessed as kind of like a key. It would be looking for our variable accumulator, and it would treat it like an object, and it would try to find a key called push. That's not what we want. And that's why the color changes when I open up braces, because this is a method. If you don't believe me, it's right here. So let's take a look at this documentation. I use this all the time. You'll probably use this all the time. That's why I was able to remember it. But here we can see we have this array. It has banana, orange, apple, and mango. But when we call this method with kiwi, let's see what happens. By the way, this is HTML, and technically the way this is working is with DOM. So let's do try it. Magic. It's kind of not that exciting, right? But the important thing to note is we just took this array and we changed the value of it using push. If we want to confirm how this works, we can read right here. The push method adds a new item to the end of an array and returns a new length. Cool. We don't need to worry about the return value on this method. That's not what we're trying to store. What we're trying to store is the new items to the end of our array. So let's go back. So what are we going to push? Well, I kind of already did the work. I'm just going to copy and paste it. Now we have a variable that's actually remembering the values that we're iterating over, and so we can actually come down here and return it. Return accumulator. I'm not going to do that. Well, actually I probably should, but I'm also going to console log it just so we can see exactly what happened. Cool. Let's clear this out. Let's run that test again. All right. Three passing.
Can you go back up there? It was console log accumulator, and then what was your next line?
You don't need to console log. All you need to do is return your accumulator. Console logging, again, is just ignored by the computer. The reason I console logged is because I wanted to show you guys what accumulator looks like at the end. This is what it is. As a matter of fact, let me get rid of these other console logs. Don't need those anymore. Let's drag this up. Clear. Okay, so I'm just gonna run the test. Let's scroll up. This is my console log of accumulator. This is what our accumulator ends up looking like. So I'll run through this real quick. What we did is we took store, just like we did up here and here, because we're requiring it with node. And then over here, we can visually reference the data that we're working with. We can also use node to run this file, to run our console logs. We can also do the tests to do our console logs. Either way, we confirmed the data that we were working with was correct, because as I was looping through this data, I was console logging it. Initially, I did not have this 0, but once we figured out that the 0 index is the one that we were looking for, then we added that in. So once we confirmed that we were iterating over the correct data, we took our accumulator, which we initially declared at the beginning of the function, and we used an array method called push, and we did that on the data stored at store1 with the key of 2015 January 8th using our iterator, which means that as we're looping through this array, 0 is the first item that we're going to add, which just so happens to be this item right here. This is the 0 index of the 2015 January 8th array. We are hitting the 0 axis with I. And so just like in a typical for loop fashion, we're going to keep I 0. We're going to grab store at January with 0. So what's 0? 0 is banana bunches 4.631. Now we're going to finish the loop. We're going to come back up. I is incremented, so now I is equal to 1. So when we run this function again, what is store at blah, 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 1? Well, it's peppermint poppers. So we're iterating over the correct data, but since we know we're working with an array, we can use array methods such as bracket notation to access the indice that we're looking for. If I wanted to type in 1, instead of grabbing all of these strings of the names, it would access the first indice. So again, this is the 0 index, and this is the first index. If I wanted to hit every single first index of all these arrays, I would type in 1 here. But that's not what we want. We want 0 because we're looking for all of the names of the candies that were sold on January 8th. And by using our accumulator, which is essentially a place where we're going to store data, we can use an array method, which we can look at more here. If you're ever confused, you don't know where you can find array methods, W3 is great. Here we also have access to all of the methods available to us. That being said, when we go back, we're going to be adding a new element to the end of our array that is in store1 at January at whatever index I is at, but we only want the 0 index of that array. So this is a little tricky because there's a lot of nested stuff going on, but really you can think of this as store is an object, so we're hitting a key off of that object. Objects are key value pairs. This is a key, as we can see right here. Now, the key is correlated with the value. The value is an array. Knowing that the value is an array, we can use array methods and array access methods. And so I put I in brackets because we are in a for loop. And I know for a fact that I is going to keep changing. So since I is 0 at the beginning, I can go ahead and throw it in here. And so we can look at this, okay, store1 at this key, so we're at this key, but we're in an array. So what's 0 in this array? It's this first array. It's nested data, so it's a little confusing, but the further you dig down, it's the same thing over and over. So we have an array. I access through this, iterating through it with I, and since we know we're in another array, we can use another array access method. And that's why I'm able to pass in 0, because I is the one that is iterating through this array. The reason I didn't put I right here is because I would be iterating over each independent array inside of this array. We don't want that. We want to iterate over this parent array, this one in purple, and we only want to grab the 0 index off of each of those arrays because they contain the candy name. So using this push method on our accumulator array, we're able to return that and coincidentally pass the test. Again, I console logged it so we can see the final value, but you can kind of see what's going on. Hopefully I can kind of get these both. Right there, right? So we're in 2000 and blah, blah, blah. We are iterating over this array with I. We're iterating over the purple array, but with 0, we're able to grab the 0 index of these nested arrays. Banana bunches, peppermint poppers. Just to drive the point home, I'll throw a different index in there, and I'll run the test again. Now, if we scroll up, instead of getting the 0 index of these arrays, I get the first index, which is the price. Same thing if I did 2. We're looping over this part of this array. So if I run this, I should see a bunch of integers. I didn't save. And there's our integers. I can already see them in the warnings, but here we go. We have an array of integers. So you can hopefully see the correlation between how we went into store, which is a variable. Again, we can collapse this down. This is one variable. Using object reference methods, which is this right here. I'm just literally almost copying and pasting this key. And we know it's a key because of this colon, semicolon, it's something, 2 dots. We know it's a key because these 2 dots on the right side of this string right here. And then, of course, we also see the beginning of the value, so we know the value is an array type. So I access this key by using bracket notation, passing in the string, that is the key, which we know it's the key because we see this semicolon, 2 dots on the right of it. Now, using a for loop, we can declare a variable which is equal to an integer and increment it on every single time we pass through. We can increment it every single time we pass through this code block, essentially. But the thing that we're trying to do is we're using I as an integer to placehold here as we go through this parent purple array. So I can be here, and we don't need to have I here because we're not trying to loop through both arrays. We're just trying to loop through this parent array and grab one thing off of it. If I wanted to, I could push everything. Get rid of that blank space there. Let's save that. It's not like this isn't allowed, right? But let me show you what we're talking about here. I console logged everything. Banana bunches, the price, and the number sold because I'm using I in this purple array. It's 0, we hit the 0 index, and then we grab 0 here, which is banana bunches. Then we grab 1, which is 4.63, and then we grab 2. And the dot push method will add that value to the end of an array. So we're looping through, I is 0, we do that, we're good. Now we increment, I is 1. What's the 1 index of this array? Well, it's peppermint poppers, so then we grab peppermint poppers, then we grab this, blah, 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 blah. So that's why we don't need anything other than 0 because we're not looking for anything but the candy names that were sold on this date. And that's why that passes the test, because it's expecting an array of candy names. So if I save, run that again, everything's going to error out except for that test again. Cool. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm gonna stop the recording.